Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode titled Introduction. Who are we and what are we doing? Before we get started, we do have an exciting announcement. We'll be speaking at the Intelligent Speech 2026 on Saturday, February 28th. Intelligent Speech is an online convention featuring some of the brightest voices in history podcasting, and we are pumped to have been invited this year. The event is always a very fun day. It's filled with diverse and interesting speakers from the podcast, YouTube, and other content creator spheres. And we will be sharing more information as we get closer, including a promo code to get a discount on buying tickets.
We're stoked to be at Intelligent Speech this year. Sarah, what movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about Temple Grandin, starring Claire Danes. Rena, can you give us a trigger warning?
Trigger warning. This movie contains depictions of and or references to misogyny, gaslighting, ableism, animal abuse, cowboys, animal husbandry, tasteful pearl earrings, bullying, NASA, the American Southwest, autism, cat's eye glasses, a machine that looks kind of like the sex machine Eric Roberts invented in Star 80 but is not, deeply tangential allusions to the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah, awkward holiday parties, snooty New York Magazine writers, cattle, slaughterhouses, cattle dips, coworkers politely suggesting that a neurodivergent colleague use deodorant, cattle auctions, grad school, the scientific method, automatic doors, and eating meat.
Rena, can you please give us a spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning. We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
Some of the sources used in this episode include episode of Neil deGrasse Tyson's podcast that Temple Grandin guest starred on, Thinking in Pictures by Temple Grandin, Temple Grandin Voice for the Voiceless by Annette Wood, and I did a bunch of reading and research on various articles, including one from the LA Times about the making of the movie.
Sarah, can you please tell us a little bit about the HBO movie Temple Grandin, starring Claire Danes, and a little bit about Temple Grandin the person?
Let me start with Temple, the person, from our friends at the Wikipedia. Mary Temple Grandin was born in August of 1947. She is an American academic, inventor, and ethologist. She is a prominent proponent of the humane treatment of livestock for slaughter and the author of more than 60 scientific papers on animal behavior. She is a consultant in the livestock industry where she offers advice on animal behavior. She is one of the first autistic people to document the insights she gained from her personal experiences with autism. She's a faculty member with Animal Sciences in the College of Agricultural Sciences at Colorado State University. In 2010, the Time 100 named her in the Heroes category. Some additional background on Temple and her family in particular. She was born in Boston into a wealthy family, and one of her family's employees was also named Mary, so she was always referred to by her middle name, Temple, to avoid confusion. This is a very rich people thing, I feel like. Temple's mother, Anna, was an actress and a singer and was the granddaughter of John Coleman Purvis, who co-invented the aviation autopilot. She had a degree in English from Harvard, and Temple's father was Richard McCurdy Grandin, and he was a real estate agent and an heir to the largest corporate wheat farm business in the U.S. at the time. Her parents divorced when she was 15, and her mom remarried a New York saxophonist named Ben Cutler when she was 18. Temple Grandin was not formally diagnosed with autism until her adulthood. When she was 2, though, she was given the only formal diagnosis available at the time, which was, quote, brain damage. a finding that was dismissed through cerebral imaging by the time she turned 63. While Grandin was still in her mid-teens, her mother chanced upon a diagnostic checklist for autism. And after reviewing the checklist, she hypothesized that her symptoms were best explained by autism. Grandin was later determined to be an autistic savant. And it's also worth mentioning when she was a toddler, the medical advice at the time for a diagnosis like hers was institutionalization, which was very controversial in the Grandin household. Temple's mother was strongly opposed to that, whereas her father wanted to follow that advice. So her mother took her to the world's leading special needs researchers at the Boston Children's Hospital and eventually found a neurologist who suggested speech therapy. And this therapist was hired, and Grandin received personal training from the age of 2.5 onward. And her mother also hired a nanny when she was 3.5 to care for her more closely. And I think it's really important to point out that Temple Grandin's family had access to the highest levels of care and had the money to care for her. I want to be clear, I'm not finding fault with the people who, on the advice of their doctor, institutionalized a child either. I think parenting under even the most optimal conditions, I've been made to understand, is very difficult. I reached a point where I was like putting my notes together and I was like, I don't even know who to be mad at anymore. I was kind of just like mad at everybody about this. The world was and continues to be a horrible place for people who think and function differently. I also want to mention, and I think I want to also be clear that I am on Temple's side on this. She's been involved in some public messiness around autism diagnostics, and I don't want to talk about it because that messiness, like around like what causes autism, why it happens, how it should be treated or not treated, should we work to eliminate it, and so on and so forth. People ask her for her thoughts around these things, and I think we should listen to people with autism when it comes to these issues and not to jackasses who think they know everything about it but don't. But because representation is such garbage around this, we end up having one person who's forced into the role of being the spokesperson and the be-all and end-all of opinions on it, and they're not allowed to kind of go on their own journeys with it. And it's absolutely not on Temple Grandin to know or decide these things. I just think that it sucks that she's been put in the position of having to kind of be all things to all people around opinions and evolving science and diagnostics around autism. And then on the movie, I don't know if I was in a really bad place when I was watching this, but I like cried through most of it. And then I laid in bed that night after I watched it and cried thinking about it. It's so good. So Temple Grandin it was a 2010 television film. It was directed by Mick Jackson, who's an ultra versatile utility knife of a director. And it stars Claire Danes. It is based on Thinking in Pictures and also her other memoir, Emergence. And it aired on great acclaim on HBO in February of that year. The biopic was inspired by executive producer Emily Gerson-Sains. Her experience as the mother of an autistic child motivated her to share Temple's story. She secured approval in the late 1990s, but obviously it took some time to get this movie to the screen. And Claire Danes really immersed herself in this role. She studied Grandin's work. She spent time with her. And the film is very lovingly crafted to honor Temple Grandin and to portray her with so much authenticity. And Claire Danes talked about her process and her approach in an LA Times interview and said, and I quote here, "I just didn't want to disappoint her and the people who care a great deal for her," said Danes, who was relieved when Grandin offered her a rare hug at the end of their first meeting. "It was like the permission I needed to take this on." Danes worked on capturing Grandin's voice in private, refusing to let Mick Jackson hear it until the first day the cameras were rolling. Throughout the shoot, she wouldn't watch any playbacks of her performance. "I had to protect myself from any self-consciousness as much as possible," Danes said. And as I said, Mick Jackson he's a terrific director, and he has absolutely no lane. And we talked about this, I think, mostly with Alan Parker in the Evita episode. I remember discussing this. We don't celebrate this kind of artist enough. We're always, like, as a society, super happy to celebrate the directors who have an uncompromising, very specific vision and kind of thesis to their work. But we kind of withhold the praise for the director who comes in, kills it, and then goes on and makes something entirely different. So Mick Jackson, first and foremost, is the director and producer behind Threads. Rena, have you heard of Threads?
I have, and I have been scared to watch it for decades.
It is a party. For anyone who doesn't know, Threads is a documentary-style BBC film from 1984 about nuclear war and its aftermath, and it makes the very similar U.S. miniseries about nuclear war and its aftermath the day after look like Tommy Boy. It is grim. So he made that. Then he goes and he directs movies like Steve Martin's L.A. Story, which is a really funny movie. Then The Bodyguard, starring Whitney Houston and our much maligned Kevin Costner. Then the disaster movie Volcano, starring Tommy Lee Jones. Then the TV movies The Memory Keeper's Daughter, Live from Baghdad, and this. And there's other things mixed in there, but I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of the diversity of his IMDb. He seems to have retired, but he's still alive and he looks happy in photos. So I think he's okay. He even did his best with Kevin Costner. He worked that dead-eyed charisma to its maximum power. Have Threads, LA Story, and this on your resume, all uniquely great and perfectly tuned to what they need to be, is pretty amazing. And I know what I'm saying when I say this, and I know what it sounds like, but Mick Jackson is in some ways like the Gene Hackman of directing. And to be able to come into a project and make it exactly what it needs to be is a gift. I also found this anecdote that I loved, if only because it's from what we know of her. And I feel like this movie does give us a real sense of knowing her. This is the Temple Grandinest thing to ever Temple Grandin. And this is from the New York Times. Quote, Grandin said that she tried to stay away from Danes to avoid impinging on her performance. She was quite concerned about the proper construction of the tank and about the breed of cattle being used in the scene where they're showing the machine. She said, I thought, we can't have a silly thing like that City Slickers movie where they had Holstein cattle out there, Grandin said. If you know anything about cattle, you'd know that was stupid.
She sounds like someone who's really passionate. And you know what? That sounds like me getting mad when the costumes are off by a few decades of the 16th century. I have gotten similarly mad about people not caring about specifics or concerned about it. So I relate to that. And go Temple. That's great.
Yeah. I just love the idea that her concern when she showed up on the set was about the breed of cattle being used in the scene. I was like, this is an amazing detail.
Yes, I did a little bit of reading from her work. The issue I ran into was that Temple Grandin thinks in pictures, but I'm a deeply verbal thinker, and I think in narratives. So I appreciate science. I revere science. But wow, we have exact opposite academic interests, because I loved learning French and I love like history and literature and anything that I can't make tell a story. I just don't have passion for it. When I was trying to read Thinking in Pictures, there'd be a little bit of story, but it would just be an anecdote, and then it would be about the science. And I was like, I appreciate this, but this isn't in my wheelhouse.
I'm probably going to be a little bit of a broken record on this. I was so brought into her world and so compelled to care about the things that she cared about because of the way this film was constructed. And the way that she was played and the way it was directed. Like, I was deeply moved by her care and concern for the cattle as they are about to die.
Yes, it gets you on her wavelength where the rest of the human race doesn't make sense. Temple Grandin may be the highest Bechdel score since Alien. I learned on the internet that at some point there was a version of the script with a tacked-on romance, and Grandin insisted that it be removed, and the movie wasn't going to get made unless they told her story without tacking on a stupid romance. And this reminded me of something that came up in the Lawrence of Arabia episode, where T. Lawrence told Alexander Korda that he didn't want a film being made of his life if they were going to tack on a love story. And everything doesn't have to be a love story. Every song doesn't have to be a love song. There are so many degrees of human experience that aren't about sex or romance or romantic love. Everything doesn't have to be a love story. And Grandin has talked about how she loves hard sci-fi and doesn't understand romances.
There's a part of me that just like wants to speculate wildly on who's good enough to date Temple Grandin. She just seems like she has way more important things to do.
And Temple Grandin, she doesn't like being touched. It's not her thing. So, welcome to the show, Claire Danes. We open on Claire Danes as the adult Temple Grandin, standing in one of those perspective rooms where we see her size change relative to how she moves in the room. And she has all of the mannerisms and the speech that you'll see in videos of Temple Grandin. She has it down pat, but it's not a caricature. And she announces that her name is Temple Grandin, that she's not like other people, and that she thinks in pictures.
She sounds just like her, but it's not an imitation. And this is easily, I'm going to say, one of the best biopics I've ever seen, in the way that it took me inside her world and her head and let me understand her in a way that I otherwise wouldn't. And we're talking about Oppenheimer in a bit. And I can't overstate how, the thing that this reminded me of was Oppenheimer and how elegantly we were brought into her world and the experience of being her and seeing how she sees things and doing it with just so much sincerity. And it does this on every front. And just from how she plays her to the music, to the visuals. And it is like the only other movie I could think of that does that in the same way that I've seen recently was Oppenheimer.
Yeah, it puts you inside her head, it diagrams it, and you see how she thinks, and you also see how she thinks literally. Like, there's a scene coming up where the aunt says, "We get up with the roosters here," and her immediate vision of it is her aunt and her uncle in their PJs sitting on the roof crowing along with the rooster.
Yeah.
Which is delightful. It's very creative in its successful use of diagrams and imagery to show us how Temple's brain works, and in getting us on her wavelength where the rest of the human race doesn't make sense.
We open on, after that intro, Catherine O'Hara picking her up at the airport in Arizona. And as soon as you see Catherine O'Hara, it's just she smiles, and I'm like, please, please, please don't be a bad person in this movie. I can't bear it. And fortunately, she is not. But
it's supposed to be the summer after the summer between high school and college, because they're saying you're going off to college in the fall. And she's like, I don't want to go. I'm already learning science with my teacher in high school. And
I'd like to learn science with her teacher from her high school, but we'll get to it.
Right. We see her pausing on the plane and holding up the line because she's marveling that she can see the heat. And the aunt is such a good ally to her, and she's understanding, and she understands where she has to a lot around Temple. And you see these mannerisms that Temple goes into giggle fits and keeps repeating this one thing she's seen on the man from U.N.C.L.E. over and over again, and she's at this moment of, would you like for me to open the gate? And then they're in front of a gate, and she's like, oh, you mean that gate? And also, I appreciate the lack of vanity here, because Claire Danes is gorgeous, but her teeth in this are actually kind of yellowish.
Yeah.
Did you clock that? They don't care about making her look pretty, which I appreciate. And it also that she has this curls springing everywhere. It's very unflattering, and I appreciated that.
It's unflattering, but also, like, I think because we see what a singular genius Temple Grandin is. I was just like completely in like this like mindset by the end of it, where I was like, we don't ever think about the things that matter. She's introducing herself to the people on the farm, and I mean, she had me at, are you a cowboy?
Yeah, I come to love just how blunt she is.
Yes.
And the way she gets you on her wavelength is you see how blunt she is. It's funny. And it's like, why do we waste time with niceties instead of being direct?
We see that Catherine O'Hara really accommodates her sensory sensitivities. She's very sensitive about what food she eats and textures and things like that. And about, like labeling her room and things like that. And then we meet her mother very briefly here. And we see more of her later, who's played by the absolutely luminous Julia Ormond. And we see her working on the farm and how tuned in she is to the animals, and also how sensitive she is to noises. And I don't want to be a broken record, but they make the noises louder and jarring, and we get to kind of understand what it was like for her to hear these things. And I thought that was really thoughtfully done. Like the sound design was really smart in how they got us like to hear things the way she would have heard them to a degree.
There's these things where she looks at the horse moving his ears to show what he's looking at. She isn't into girly things. Like there's that scene where Catherine O'Hara calls Julia Ormond and says, she's like, guess what? I found stuff behind the door. And Julia Ormond is like, a lovely frock that she didn't.
She doesn't have time for it.
Well, it's like she doesn't care, and it doesn't give her pleasure. And
yeah. She sees what's the genesis for the squeeze machine that she creates here, when she sees how the cows are soothed by being held tightly. And then at one point, the sign that she has on her door that is labeling her room falls off, and she panics, and we see it from her perspective of what that feels like to see her room suddenly become not her room. And what she does is she runs to the squeeze machine and lets herself be contained by it, and it soothes her. It works.
They talk about how she does not like being hugged, like does not like human touch. And you also see how painful this is to her mother, who just wants to hold her child, but that the feeling of being hugged gives her security.
It's really wonderful to see how open-minded her family is.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly for the time period. Not only would she have been institutionalized, in many situations, like we were also, like when she was a child, like we were lobotomizing people still.
Mm-hmm.
And like the thing that I hate about it and is that this has to be an extraordinary story, that because of the way our world is and the way our world was, someone having patient, engaged educators and supportive adults and people capable of dedicating the resources to helping her find such a wonderful path in this world, it has to be an inspiring, extraordinary story. Because I kept thinking about, this is the point where I started crying and didn't stop. Like, for every Temple Grandin, how many people did we fail?
Oh, yeah.
And, the diagnosis she's given in the movie is infantile schizophrenic, which, what the fuck? We see the flashback where she's diagnosed and her mother is like, no, we're not doing this. And then we see how her doctor blames it on her being what was called at the time a refrigerator mom. Which, she didn't nurture her daughter enough. And that's why she's like this, because if we're not blaming the moms for one thing, we're blaming them for another thing, but it's always the mother's fault, of course, in this world, since time immemorial. It's always the mom who ruined everything.
We never meet Mr. Grandin in this movie. It seems that he was emotionally distant. I don't mind that they don't touch on if something is simply omitted rather than being mistold, I don't see that as an inaccuracy. It's not important.
Like, I get that most parents can't do this much and can't be this engaged. But if we had social safety nets that encouraged us to take care of people too, but forget about it.
So this doctor is super patronizing to Mrs. Grandin, and she produces one of my favorite moments in the film where she says, her response, he says, "Can I please speak to your husband?" And she says, "My husband is a very busy man. I went to Harvard. Try me." I am sure women still have this kind of interaction all the time. I had a thought here that wouldn't it have been Radcliffe then? Because that was where women went. But I understand that this only rings a bell to a small set of audiences who know the history of the Ivy League and the Seven Sisters. And my father said that, like, when he went to MIT, everybody said that the Radcliffe women were smarter than the Harvard men.
Of course they were. So we see her then go on to college. She goes to Franklin Pierce, and she's struggling with some of the things that she has to do at college, the cafeteria, French class, some of the social stuff. And we experience like her photographic memory when she's in French class, and she looks at her French text and she remembers it immediately because she's seeing the picture of the words and she's able to recite it, albeit with the kind of accent I tend to employ when I do French, but she speaks it and knows it cold.
Here was where I didn't relate to her so much because our academic interests are completely polar opposite. And then one of the things she was bugging out at the beginning because she didn't have a roommate, and you see that she's built herself the squeeze box in the room. And Temple Grandin said in interviews about that actually she had the squeeze box for a long time. And about 10 years ago, it broke. She never replaced it, and she doesn't mind hugs anymore.
Yeah.
So she's had a very long, slow adjustment. And she's also said that people who speak to her now say that she sounds less autistic than she did 20 years ago.
Interesting.
Like Temple Grandin, she doesn't judge people for eating meat. She has this very matter-of-fact view where these creatures exist around our needs, so we should treat them better up to the last minute.
And listen, her roommate walking in on her in that squeeze box, I get it. That's a real weird thing to walk in on. And this is something you could totally have expected if you were at Bard, but not necessarily at Franklin Pierce and from someone in a science vertical. I get it. That totally would have been someone's senior project, though, at Vassar.
Yeah. I did sort of feel bad for this roommate and they get all the notes about what that part of the 60s looks like with the cat's eye glasses and the very done hair and the skirt and sweater sets. And everyone looks like they found stuff from The Villager. It's all really well done. Yeah. But I get that this girl is showing up and she's expecting one sort of thing from college and her roommate, and she's all she hasn't heard. I doubt she's even heard the word neurodivergent. It's 1960 something.
And the school takes her machine out of commission and destroys it, which is shitty. But again, I get how strange this would look. And she leaves and she's pissed off, and she says that she will only go back if she can bring her machine. And the school's like, no, this is too weird for us. But Catherine O'Hara, bless, is like, nope, you're going to take her back. And she said that she'll do a research project to prove its value.
Yay. And she has this moment with there are these little tropes it comes back to, and one of them is clicking the end of the pen. And I've heard that that's something that's it's a soothing tick.
And then we have another flashback where we're back in high school.
Yes.
And we see her struggling in high school and with like some of the social dynamics. Like she's obviously very bright and she's at this school that is supposed to be for kids who have issues. We see her kind of like getting the lay of the land. And then we see David Strathairn. If ever there was a hot for teacher, he eyes her and he seems to sense immediately like the fellow traveler in his world.
Yes. And well, we talked about with age impropriety, why hot for teacher, it is not a fantasy you want to come true, but we are sitting here as grown adults appreciating David
like this
Strathairn. So we are hot for this teacher.
Yes.
And the scene of her meeting David Strathairn, where it's mentioned that he worked at NASA and they both immediately know the names of the 2 dogs sent into space that came back to Earth. But this scene of her meeting him and them bonding over NASA facts reminds me of the "How much do you lift" scene from Boogie Nights, where John C. Reilly and Mark Wahlberg meet and realize they are about to become best friends. But also of another great John C. Reilly scene, the Velociraptor scene opposite Will Ferrell in Step Brothers.
That is the perfect description of what has happened here.
Mm-hmm.
And
did we again, just become best friends?
Yeah. And I started crying again at this point because again, the world we live in right now is marked by chaos and cruelty and absurdity. I feel like there's this sort of like this passion to eliminate this kind of thinking and this kind of individual.
Mm-hmm.
And that our world cannot accommodate it. And but also this movie is packed to the gills with people who are just really good people, like not in an obnoxious way, just with like real people who are just decent and caring and take that extra step with someone to understand them and to accommodate them and to help them and to be on their wavelength. And I really loved seeing that.
No, and one thing they did change, he was Mr. Carlock. He did not hold a doctorate, but he's referred to here as Dr. Carlock. And the reason for that is that Temple Grandin said that she wanted him to be called Dr. Carlock. She felt he deserved a doctorate, and it's her movie, so.
I love that. And we see that, with teachers like David Strathairn, like she is doing really well in school in some ways, but also kids are still dicks, and she gets punished for punching a kid in the face after he sort of assaults her with some detritus within the barn. And her punishment is not being allowed to ride on horses, which she loves doing. And we see her at one point here sneak into the stables, and she sees a horse that is passing away and dies. And this is where Strathairn realizes that she can see everything, like her visual sensibility, and how she remembers everything that she's seen and how he wants to work with her. And he shows a film on perspectives in class, and she is all in on this visual learning and figuring out how it works and why it works. And she builds an entire model to explain it. She also, so we see like this initial triumph. We cut back to her in college, and she shows her report to her professor and gets to keep her machine.
First, she gets an F on the assignment, and then she goes back to her high school and talks to David Strathairn, and then they figure out what she needs to change to prove it, because she has had other students getting in the machine and then describing how they feel. She gets a new roommate who's blind, and it's kismet because they both like Man from U.N.C.L.E. and, of course, Temple Grandin loves Star Trek.
They have an affinity, and they both have a sort of superpower aided by being differently functioning. Like when you're blind, your other senses apparently tune up. and get super strong, and they have that connection. And this is a great little performance by an actress named Melissa Farman, who is actually not blind. I thought she played it extraordinarily well.
Yes.
Like, Al Pacino won an Oscar for playing a blind person way worse than this.
Yeah. And, like, of course, Temple Grandin's favorite character is Spock, Mr. No Emotions, and it's time for a quick round of All Roads Lead to the Conqueror. Are you ready?
Oh, fun!
So, Star Trek is produced by Lucille Ball's studio, which bought out the RKO costumes after Howard Hughes gutted RKO, which is how John Wayne's Genghis Khan costume from The Conqueror winds up being worn by a Klingon in Star Trek.
Oh my gosh. And it was probably filled with radiation.
Oh, yeah. I don't want to throw us off here, but I bet recycledmoviecostumes.com has a picture of John Wayne side by side with the Klingon, so we probably could look up who played that Klingon and find out whether they got cancer.
I would love for you to do that extra work in your free time, just because I want to.
Just not while we are in the middle of
not
taping
while
this
we're
episode.
like actually recording, but I would be very interested.
Yes.
And we see her reach the point where she graduates from college, and she must have been, I guess, a high achiever of some kind. They don't explain exactly why she was speaking at graduation, but probably like a valedictorian or something that I don't understand. And she sings "You'll Never Walk Alone" with the utmost sincerity as part of her graduation speech, and it's very lovely.
Would you say that she is a better singer than Florence Foster Jenkins?
Absolutely. It's not like a melodic voice, but it's very in tune.
Okay.
So she is going to go get her master's at Arizona State, and she is walking around a ranch, and we're seeing just how brutal the workers are to animals in this line of work. And she comments about how she wants to write her master's thesis on mooing, but specifically, what it indicates. But of course, it's a joke because she's a woman, and and that's ridiculous. Why do you care about the animals? We're going to just kill them and eat them.
The men around her are very belittling. She's called Little Lady multiple times. They have no use for a woman who isn't there to be pretty for them.
No,
and she deals with so much sexism and closed off access, and it's horrible.
Yeah, but also, like, it's so interesting to see the way she works. The way she explores the space and gets herself into the animal's headspace to try and understand how to improve their end of life experience. And
a bunch of assholes at this ranch that she's trying to get access to for her studies dump bull testicles all over the windshield of her car, and she throws them at them. And I love this. She's standing there in her overalls and she yells, "I've eaten bull testicles. My aunt served them to us. You're wasteful."
Yes. It reminded me of, this is a specific call out. If you've ever seen Wet Hot American Summer, one of the characters calls a nerdy kid a douche, and he's like, "I'm not insulted by that. A douche is a very important feminine product," or something to that effect.
So she goes back east for Christmas and endures a family Christmas party while wearing an ugly sweater, and it's awkward, but this is a very real portrayal of what holiday parties and like old relatives and family, your parents' friends peppering you with inane questions actually feels like when you like. It's very real to what holiday parties actually feel like, especially when you're like a teen or in your 20s. And there's a couple that asks her questions, and she's like, "Oh, I've been published," or like my work around like And they're like, oh, so is our son. And they call him over, and it turns out he's been in New York Magazine and he is not impressed with her life. And I'm just like, go suck it, New York Magazine.
Well, also, like for her audience, like she's absolutely being published in the right places. And I'm going to put on my publicist hat here for a moment and just say that the value of content is also in reaching the right readers.
Mm-hmm.
And her content wouldn't be valuable in New York Magazine.
No, but she's being judged and it's so awkward. And she goes upstairs and she has this scene with Julia Ormond, and Julia Ormond, who they age very gracefully over her, very, very gracefully over the course of the film, says, like, this is me saying that I love you and I respect you, Temple. And it's such a beautiful scene between them.
Oh, they're just, this movie is just wall-to-wall asshole dudes, though.
So there's been this guy who was a complete douche to her, who she needs to get to sign off. And eventually she finds out that she meets one other guy on this ranch who she's talking to, who seems like he actually has a brain, who says, oh yeah, that guy never signs off on anything. I'll sign this. And it turns out that everybody else hates this guy who was super patronizing to her, who she had to get the sign off from. Too, like, you discover that like because she's super blunt and doesn't know, like, the people will ask her, oh, how did you get along with Don down at this ranch? And she's like, oh, I hated him, or oh, I hated him, but she'll say, and then they'll kind of laugh and they will like her for having not had a great experience with this guy who had so much authority. So she has an article to write. She's getting work with this cattle magazine, and she meets a man who needs a new cattle dip, and she designs one where it soothes the animals by having them walk in circles, and then where it's been done before with like a metal ramp for them to go down, she realizes they need to be on ground that they feel steady on, and it's like nothing anyone's ever seen before. So of course, someone who hasn't had it like explained to them blow by blow and doesn't have an appreciation for the scientific method or the ability to look at new things or respect for things done by a woman, say, they basically destroy it, turning it back into what it is. And why is this, Sarah? What is it about these men?
Just, it doesn't work because these men are fucking assholes.
Yeah, because all of the things that made her design unique that they hadn't seen before, they messed it up. And I am mortified watching this bunch of smooth-brained, buffered pussers destroying her brilliant work. I'm so mad. And these men who ruin her design stand for everything that is wrong with America. And here we are at a moment from this film that I treasured in my brain for years, but it turns out that the line I had her saying in my head is not what she actually says. It's one of those play it again, Sam moments. And it's also, as soon as I saw this, remember when we go back to the Michael preview episode where I talk about how there was that moment in the Jackson 5 miniseries of, why you gots to be so ugly, LaToya?
Yes.
After finding out that the line from Temple Grandin that was in my head is not in Temple Grandin, I don't want to watch the Jackson 5 miniseries again, because I don't want to find out that why you gots to be so ugly, LaToya, doesn't exist. And this moment, so in my head, when she's angry at these men, what she yells at them is, you ruined it with your stupidity. Which I've been thinking ever since. This needs to be like the most popular meme ever. This needs to be like 2.5% of all memes. Just Claire Danes like railing at them like, you ruined it with your stupidity. I cannot tell you how often I want to scream at people, you ruined it with your stupidity. And I was disappointed to find out that she never yells, you ruined it with your stupidity, because that's how it was enshrined in my head. What she actually yells at these dumb cowboys who, like, the reason the cattle die is because they changed it back to this old design that makes cattle panic, because what she actually yells at them is, you killed them with your stupidity, and followed by a variant on that. And so This is kind of turning into a little bit of a holiday episode because we talked about awkward Christmas parties. And now, can I please tell you about how the cowboys' thought processes in destroying Temple's brilliant cattle dip reminds me of a certain old Jewish folktale that ties in with Hanukkah?
Of course you can.
So there is this old Jewish folktale about a man whose wife makes terrible latkes that taste like bricks. And his neighbor's wife makes wonderful latkes with this cloud-like texture. So he says, I'm going to fix how my wife makes latkes. And he goes over to this house and takes notes on all the different special little things, like that she puts an egg in, or the different special little things that his neighbor's wife does differently to make the latkes different. And then he goes home and he tells his wife, okay, I'm going to walk you through this. And then each time he comes to something, she's like, no, that's not how you do it. And he's like, okay. And she winds up making the same latkes. She's all the same brick-like, heavy, not good latkes she's always made, because she's like, every time she hears a new idea on how to make her latkes better, she's like, that's not how you do it. This is how you do it. And he winds up it comes to the conclusion, the latkes taste exactly the same. So he comes to the conclusion that either the neighbor's wife's latkes aren't good or that latkes aren't good. But I mean, and the point of you can see the point of the story, but what these cowboys do to her design reminded me of that folktale.
That's a very, very adept comparison.
So anyway, she drives to California to talk to David Strathairn, and they conclude that what she needs to do is design the entire slaughterhouse. And she goes to Abbott, a slaughterhouse whose practices she thinks are just awful, to pitch her designs for a new slaughterhouse, but she is escorted out by security.
Yes, she is. And we find out here, so devastating. Several days later, she gets the call that David Strathairn has died.
I know, and you see her turn up to his funeral in her. By this time, she's put on what we think of as the Temple Grandin uniform, which is the cowpoke shirt with the pin in it, and you see her visualization that it's like a general putting on his pin. And her way of honoring him is that she puts her little cattle pin into the thing. But I know it, just going back to the scene of her putting on what we think of as like the Temple Grandin cowpoke shirt, it reminds me of the first time you see our old friend Peter O'Toole put on the Lawrence of Arabia robes in Lawrence of Arabia. The funeral is open casket. I find the whole concept of an open casket funeral really disturbing, because in all of my memories of my loved ones, they're alive. I don't understand why anyone would want their final image of someone to be them as a corpse.
I got mixed feelings about that.
But she lets Julia Ormond hug her. And the look on her mother's face finally getting this moment is incredible. I think you probably cried again here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I was weeping hysterically here because also, they had a whole conversation earlier in the movie, she and David Strathairn, about what happens when you die and what things remain with you. And he connected it very nicely to the way that she sees pictures in her head and can remember everything, every pair of shoes that she's seen and things like that. And the way that he encouraged her to remember people, and that's what happens when you die. And thinking about it on those lines as she's saying goodbye to the man who mentored her is devastating. Their way of looking at death reminded me a lot of in Slaughterhouse-Five, how they break down, how Vonnegut breaks down what death is to him and where people go in the afterlife, and how there's a version of you alive and existing on another dimension, and all of these dimensions are happening at once. It's a very comforting view of afterlife.
Yeah.
Temple is in a grocery store and she is trying to leave, and we've seen earlier in the movie that she has a real problem with automatic doors, which same, and just that she sees them and she's seeing a guillotine.
she meets she meets this sweet woman who doesn't know what autistic means. She hears it as artistic, but this woman is just, I guess, what we mean when we say that someone is a good Christian. She helps Temple through the door, and Temple mentions, I designed this cattle dip that they say was a work of brilliance, and I want to do, and this woman just says, oh, my husband works over at Abbott, come to dinner. And this is just like, good things happen when you put yourself out there.
Yeah, and this is a lovely performance too. This is an actress named Stephanie Faracy, who is a working actress, one of those actors who has a kabillion credits on IMDb, and she's just delightful in this brief role, and her warmth and kindness like radiate off of the film, and how kind she is to Temple in this moment, and how she takes that extra step of being like, listen, I get it and it's okay, and we're going to do this together, and it's wonderful. And she gets into Abbott, and Temple completely charms these men with her utter competence in explaining her structure and how it works. And when she gets pushback about the cost and how it's going to be too time consuming, she's right there with the answers about how much time it takes you to reset the line when the cow falls off of it, or when they get stressed out or scared. Like, this is just a way that will ultimately save you time if you invest in it, and they go for it.
Yeah. It's great. It's wonderful. And there's a moment where she says, I see everything in my head. And she says, I'm like Thomas Edison or Nikola Tesla. And I believe her, except it's a little too nice to Thomas Edison.
Yeah.
For her to compare herself to him.
I will agree that she should compare herself to Tesla, but Thomas Edison saw ideas in other people's head and stole them. And we reach our final scene where she is at the National Autism Convention, where she stands up and she speaks about her experiences as an autistic person. And she has the comment about the animals that she says, nature is cruel, but we don't have to be, and we owe them respect.
And people ask her, how did you get cured? And she said, I'm not cured.
Yeah.
And they give her the floor, and it's just so good to see how far she's come, and her with her mother, and it's a really lovely picture, and super memorable. And you know what? I'm still gonna make that meme thing for our social of her yelling, "You ruined it with your stupidity" at the Cowboys, and let it live like that, because
I feel like that's kind of what Temple would want.
Yeah.
I love that she was able to realize this destiny for herself without having to get fixed.
I love that they were able to get this movie made without tacking on a stupid romance.
I can't even wrap my brain around that. That is the most absurd thing. Oh, so just a little bit of awards talk. This won a ton of awards, as it should have.
Yes.
Many of which were for Claire Danes, who deserves them and was absolutely brilliant in this movie. And I don't know if you know this, but Claire Danes was a dancer as a child until she was 14 and became a movie star. And she picked it back up again in adulthood. And I think it shows in the way that she slips into physicality so well in her work. This is a full body performance, and she plays it so well. And it's not imitation, because there's not a ton of source material for her to imitate. So I do feel like it is her own creation, but it is very faithful to the person that Temple Grandin is. And it won 5 Primetime Emmy Awards for Best Television Film, for direction by Mick Jackson, which, as I said, he deserves that. David Strathairn and Julia Ormond also won Emmys for their performances in this. On top of Claire Danes, it also won Golden Globe and Screen Actors Guild prizes for Claire Danes.
So choice dialogue, since unfortunately you killed them with your, since unfortunately you ruined it with your stupidity is not actually a line from this movie. You killed them with your stupidity. And also, my husband is a very busy man. I have a degree from Harvard. Try me.
I loved that she kept coming back to this theme around like going through doors, and exploring opportunities even when she was terrified. And just that line that came up a couple of times, a door opened and I went through it.
Yeah. A door opened and I walked through. Sarah, can you please give our listeners a quick refresher about how we score movies?
Of course, we rate movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively important in most films, tailored to specific issues, particular to biopics. If you want more details on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for our past episodes there. And with that out of the way, let's score this thing.
So for outward appearances, makeup and hair, I gave it an 8.5. They did a really good job. For acting and casting, do they capture the spirit of the people they are playing? Beyond that, is the acting good? I gave it a 9.75. Passage of time, I gave it a 9. Costuming, 9, which I now feel like that was a little high because they don't have to do anything too remarkable, but everything looks really authentic. Quality of the script, 9. Accuracy, 7. It changed a bunch of things, but Temple approved it, and I get what they did for cohesion's sake, and the parts that matter, they are told well. For storytelling, I gave it a 9. For production value, 8.5. For production direction decision-making, I gave it a 10. And for do we care, I gave it an 8.5, which brought my score to 8.825, which I think it deserved.
Love it. So for outward appearances, I gave it a 9. Acting and casting, I gave it a 10. Passage of time, 6. Costuming, 9. Quality of the script, 9. Accuracy, 7. Storytelling, 9. Production value, 9. Production direction decision making, 9. And do we care? I gave it a 10. I cared so deeply. And as I said, maybe I might have been, I may have been in a place, but I had a very emotional reaction to it. And I've been talking about it constantly since I watched it and recommending it to people.
So what's your average, Sarah?
My average is 8.7. Temple Grandin, you have secured an 8.7625.
So Temple Grandin, you have earned a second opinion.
Yes. It's time for second opinion, the element we stole from How Did This Get Made?
The prize for scoring above an 8 or below a 4 is that you get to hear us make fun of IMDb reviewers who disagreed with our assessment of the film. This is a much beloved film, and there were only 2 bad reviews on IMDb. One of them has 1 star, the other one has 3. Our first bad review of Temple Grandin. 1 star out of 10. This movie should not have been made. Written by John Hart 50901 on March 17th of 2021. Anyone that likes this piece of garbage needs to stop watching movies and go back to reading C. Run. Worst acting I've seen since The Happening. And 3 people found this review helpful.
Cool.
It's C. Run, not C. Run, first of all.
Yes. Worst acting since The Happening. Wow. Sick burn. Random burn. That's 2 sentences of uselessness.
Yeah, this is just a pointless and uninformative review. So, on this next review,
3 stars out of 10. Nothing grand about this Ms. Grandin biofilm, Asterix, which I'm hoping we'll get to later. Written by Edward Green on February 5th, 2010. This review contains a spoiler.
Ooh.
I love
that we don't apologize for our spoilers, but go on.
Yeah, and also we've ruined the movie for you already if you were waiting for the twist in this film. So, spoiler. A very disappointing film dealing with the autistic Temple Grandin, who, despite her handicap, went on to earn a PhD.
Woo. If you close your eyes, you would think that Claire Danes was doing an impersonation of the old Carol Burnett shows.
The film is quite choppy. Grandin's high school and college years go by quickly. We observe the autistic child is socially maladjusted, yet she is able to give the valedictory address at high school.
They weren't watching, that's college. Perhaps the last 20 minutes of the film is the best, since the Grandin character explains to an audience how she was able to cope with her autism and to achieve so much. So I think that Edward Green likes films that tell him things instead of showing them, which is quite opposite to how most people like their films.
I mean, this could be a save it for the end of the review remark, but I'm going to say it right here. I am Homer Simpson backing into the bush .gif right now with this person's perception of what it means to be autistic.
Yeah.
Okay. Claire Danes does an adequate job as the autistic girl who learned to talk with a high-pitched voice. As the award people always go for people with handicaps, expect Miss Danes to be walking down the aisles of Emmy and Golden Globe. I'm uncomfortable.
In a supporting role, David Strathairn portrays an understanding science teacher. With his wonderful support, Ms. Grandin was able to achieve, yet she is unable to cope at his funeral years later. That's not what happens. She makes a beautiful gesture of putting her pin with him as she sees people. She doesn't act out. I don't understand what movie they were watching or thought they were watching.
I'm very uncomfortable. The film showed how the Grandin character was able to put to use effectively her intuitiveness and understanding that we as a society could never cope with.
The film is terribly cliche and needed much more of her earlier years. Why didn't HBO include more of the early years when they could have shown what her mother went through? Why are we constantly making movies that exploit the handicaps of people? This film was strands of information put together to convey a message. Even the students who made fun of Temple were restrained. Believe me, in a regular classroom, she would have faced harsher treatment. 16 people found this review helpful, 139 did not.
16 whole people?
Wow.
This review is all over the lot, first of all, in its interpretation of what it means to be autistic. Second of all, just the review, like the substance of the review is kind of scattershot.
Yeah, it seems like they wanted all the sorts of, like the filmmaking they want would be, it sounds rather dull. Like they want half of it to be about, like it fits a nice taut 2 hours. It conveys exactly what we need to know about her childhood. I don't know if they want like 3.5 hours where we see every year of grade school, which would not be good filmmaking.
I mean, also just like we're making movies that exploit the handicaps of people in this paragraph, and then talks about how the students were too restrained and how they made fun of Temple. And I'm kind of like, so did you want to see Temple get abused more? Because that is exploiting people's handicaps. I don't know where we are on calling autism a handicap. I don't even know where we are on using the word handicapped anymore. Like, this review is a minefield of things that are making me incredibly uncomfortable.
Well, I would like to see Edward Green's interpretation of Robert Downey Jr.'s full retard speech from Tropic Thunder.
Yeah.
I feel like this reviewer would think that Simple Jack deserved in fact, Maybe he's from, like, the terrorist camp in Tropic Thunder and loves the movie Simple Jack. Like, maybe we're in a universe where Tropic Thunder is real.
I'm so uncomfortable.
I know, it's icky. So, other stuff that you should watch instead, watch Temple Grandin. It's 2 hours, it's on HBO Max. And also, shout out to Tom Stoppard, who I know by the time this is released, he will have been dead for well over a month. But at the time that I was taking notes for it, he had died this past week.
Yes. Arcadia is transformative. It will change your life. Read it.
Yes. Also the trilogy that he wrote about the Russians, which I had the privilege to see at Lincoln Center. They did all 3 on one day, and it was incredible. Yeah, and we are sorry for the delay in getting this episode out to you. Sarah was very sick, and we will be slowing down our release schedule a bit over the course of the next couple months. So this episode will be coming to you around mid-December. Sometime between Christmas and New Year's, we will be releasing a very Oppenheimer holiday episode. And then we will have an episode on what we can expect from the biopic in 2026. In January, we'll be doing The Conspirator and I, Tanya, possibly something else in there. We will be going back to our regular weekly Tuesday release schedule in February with the start of Black History Month. And we will have a lot of exciting news. There are things we can't talk about yet coming at you in the next few months.
Yeah, I lost my voice for 4 days.
It was gone. You sounded like death in the recordings you sent.
I kept sending you recordings of me talking just to be like, I really am quite sick.
I didn't know if you were sending them to show how sick you sounded, or if you were so sick that you thought they sounded sexy with huskiness. Really, you don't get the sexy Billie Holiday husky until, like, you're 2 days after the peak of the cold, at the earliest.
No, it was like straight up like Mercedes McCambridge in The Exorcist. Like, your mother sucks cocks in hell is what I sounded like. I did not sound sexy.
No. So, retractions, apologies, and listener mailbag. We have something this week.
Yeah. Before we go, we have to apologize for something we said in a previous episode that turned out to be misinformation, and we are sorry for this.
We were wrong. Sometimes we're wrong.
Rena, what were we wrong about?
We have been getting the IMDb stats on how many people found a review helpful wrong since the beginning of this podcast in the spring of 2024. It turns out that it's a thumbs up, thumbs down thing, not an out of. And it was a very basic, dumb mistake. I ruined it with my stupidity. I did.
It's all bad. We need to cancel this show.
Because, like, women shouldn't be allowed to have podcasts.
No.
Little
No,
lady.
women shouldn't be allowed to do anything, really.
No.
So, no, it's
women
very
shouldn't
bad.
be allowed to carry children. Men should have the babies because we do such a bad job at it, since I think autism is due to women being the ones who get pregnant.
I mean, we didn't talk about this, but do we know what vaccination schedule Temple Grandin was on?
I don't give a flying fuck.
Like, did she come into the future and get, like, the 8,000 vaccines that babies supposedly get, like, the second they come out that I've heard about?
The polio vaccine was not yet available when she was born.
Okay, so, I mean, I guess, so time travel is the only explanation we have for autism.
Clearly.
Yes.
But I don't know. I think that the problem isn't vaccines. The problem is that women are unfit to carry children and men should do it instead.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is always women.
Autism is caused by mothers existing.
Yes. But who would men blame if they couldn't blame women? Because they can't hold themselves accountable for this.
God?
Sure. That seems okay.
Yeah. before we go?
Our podcast baby has matured into a toddler, and we have launched a Patreon, simply an effort to defray some of the costs associated with bringing our show to you. Platform hosting costs, recording costs, equipment costs, research costs, and we have to occasionally order a book off the internet.
That's right. Our podcast baby is now a year and a half old. It can do the most adorable little diaper waddle for about 50 steps before occasionally stumbling. It is long since weaned and can feed itself a wide variety of solid food with its hands before throwing the food on the floor to indicate that it is done eating. It has grown a solid mouthful of sharp little sharky white teeth that it is not afraid to use, and it is still young enough that we can curse around it for a few more months before it figures out what we're saying. And I think that it has your megawatt smile in my distant eyes.
And it's gotten all of its vaccines. And indeed, babies sometimes demand that we pay for movie rentals because we are not monsters. And sometimes we may want to see a movie in theaters, or we may have to pay for transit to see each other if we want to record in the same place at the same time. So we are offering shout outs and access to our awful first 3 episodes to anyone who chips in for us. And with that, we'd love to say thank you to Brandon and Gates, who are already signed up.
Thank you, Brandon and Gates.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to remind you again, we will be appearing at the Intelligent Speech Conference on February 28th of this year of 2026. We will, in the next few weeks, we will have a promo code for our listeners, which will get you 10% off your ticket. So stay tuned for that.
Yes, indeed. And if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is @Biopic a Podcast Story, so do check us out there, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. Please also check out our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com to see the official episode ratings for all of the movies that we've done so far. And if you would like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com. Our theme music is by Ben Patch. The intro is his song Slater Cannonball, and the outro is Spring Breakers, and you can check him out on Spotify.
Good night to the earnest and the cynical.
Good night.
Good night, Sarah.